the front door opened before I could say one word. I was standing in my own living room with my 1-year-old daughter on my hip, still wearing my army dress uniform. Dust from a 9-month deployment barely brushed off my boots, while my husband's entire family stared at me like I had committed some terrible crime. My husband, Ethan Cole, had just slapped a DNA test onto the coffee table and said, "It's negative, she's not my child." Then his mother, Diane, pointed at the door and screamed, "Get out of my house!" That was the moment the front door opened, and the man who stepped inside made every person in that room go silent. But let me back up a little. That morning, I had stood on the tarmac at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, in a formation of 200 soldiers, listening to the bass band play as families rushed forward to meet the buses. 9 months in a forward operating base halfway around the world will do something to a person. It hollows you out and fills you back up at the same time. I was tired in that deep-down military way, the kind of tired that gets into your bones and stays there for weeks. But I was happy. I was finally home. My daughter, Lily, had spent those 9 months with her grandmother, Diane, while Ethan worked long hours at his firm. I had video called every chance I got, watched her grow from a baby who could barely sit up to a toddler who could say, "Mama," clear as day on a cracked laptop screen with terrible signal. All I could think about on that flight home was holding her. My own father had been an infantry officer, and he used to tell me that deployments don't just take time away from you, they take a version of your life you never get back. I understood what he meant the moment I stepped off that bus and saw Lily's face in a photograph Naomi had sent me that morning, a version of her I hadn't met yet. My father passed away 4 years earlier, a heart attack in his sleep, 2 months after I commissioned. Colonel Whitfield had stood beside me at the funeral in his dress uniform, close enough that I could hear him breathing hard, trying not to cry in front of the other officers. He and my father had served together for 11 years, through 2 deployments and a friendship that outlasted both of their marriages to the Army. After the funeral, he took my hand and said, "Your father asked me for one thing, the last time we spoke. He asked me to look after you if you ever needed it. I intend to keep that promise for as long as I'm breathing." I hadn't needed to call on that promise in 4 years. I had no idea I would need it that very night. Around 3 that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "Don't be late tonight. Mom has a surprise waiting for you." I stared at the message and smiled. A surprise. After months of short replies and video calls that felt more like status reports than conversations between a husband and wife, I let myself hope. Maybe Diane had finally decided to welcome me home properly instead of treating my service like an inconvenience to her son's life. I texted back, "That's sweet. I'll be there by 6. I drove straight from the demobilization center to Diane's house to pick up Lily. When she saw me, she reached out with both arms, babbling, "Mama, Mama," like she'd been rehearsing it all day just for this moment. I held her so tight I probably scared her a little. I strapped her into her car seat, fixed the little white bow in her hair, and drove toward the house Ethan and I had bought together 3 years earlier, the down payment coming straight out of my re-enlistment bonus. I remember thinking about that as I drove, how every brick of that house had a piece of my service baked into it. The house looked warm when I pulled into the driveway. Lights on, cars lining the curb, Ethan's truck, his sister's SUV, an unfamiliar sedan I didn't recognize. I laughed softly to myself. Well, Lily girl, looks like Grandma Diane went all out. But when I carried Lily up the steps and opened the front door, the warmth disappeared. The living room was packed. Ethan's relatives sat shoulder to shoulder on the couch, in folding chairs, even along the wall. No one said hello. No one stood up. No one smiled. Ethan stood near the coffee table. Diane stood beside him like she was waiting for a verdict. I looked around and said, "What's going on?" Ethan reached down, picked up a white envelope, and threw a paper onto the table. "DNA test results," he said. "She's not my child." For a second, I couldn't breathe. Lily grabbed my collar, confused by the silence. I looked at the paper, then at Ethan. "What are you talking about?" Diane stepped forward, her face hard as stone. "We know what you did," she said. "You humiliated this family." Then she pointed at the door. "Get out of my house." Before I could say a word, the front door opened behind me. A calm, steady voice said, "Captain Reyes." Everyone turned. Colonel James Whitfield stepped into the room in his Army service uniform, silver eagles on each shoulder. He wasn't a man who needed to raise his voice to command a room. His presence alone changed the air in it. I instinctively straightened my posture, balancing Lily on my hip. "Good evening, sir," I said quietly. He nodded. "At ease, Captain." His eyes swept across the room. The packed living room, the relatives sitting stiffly, Ethan's pale face, Diane's fingers still pointing toward the door, and finally the tears gathering in Lily's bright eyes. The colonel frowned. I seemed to have interrupted something. No one answered. Ethan swallowed hard. "Colonel Whitfield, sir? This is a family matter." So I gathered. His calm voice somehow made the room even quieter. He looked at me. "Captain Reyes, are you all right?" I wanted to answer, I really did, but my throat felt tight. Instead, Lily buried her face against my shoulder and began crying softly. Colonel Whitfield took one slow step into the room. "I was told there was a homecoming celebration for one of my finest officers tonight. Mrs. Cole was kind enough to call my office herself 2 weeks ago and invite me personally." His eyes shifted toward Diane, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something cross his face. Not confusion, but recognition. He understood, in that instant, exactly what this had been engineered to be. Diane had known who he was to me. She had known that I would never raise my voice or make a scene in front of the one man who had stood beside my father's casket. She had wanted an audience worthy of the humiliation she was planning. Someone whose presence alone would make me too ashamed to fight back. It was a calculated move, and for a few seconds, standing there in that living room, I understood that Diane was smarter and more deliberate than I had ever given her credit for. She simply hadn't accounted for what kind of man she was inviting into her plan. Ethan forced a nervous smile. "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding." Diane quickly jumped in. "Colonel, we're just dealing with some unpleasant family business." He didn't react to her. Instead, he noticed the paper lying on the coffee table. "May I?" Ethan hesitated before picking it up and handing it over. "It's a DNA report," the colonel said, adjusting his reading glasses and carefully scanning the document. Nobody spoke. Even Lily had stopped crying, almost as if she could sense how tense the room had become. After nearly a minute, he lowered the paper. "Who ordered this test?" "I did," Ethan said immediately. "And where was it performed?" Ethan named a laboratory I had never heard of. The colonel looked back down at the report. Then he asked, quietly, "Was Captain Reyes present when this sample was collected?" Ethan looked uncomfortable. "No." "Was there a court order?" "No." "Was the chain of custody documented?" Ethan blinked. I don't know." The colonel folded the report neatly. "I've spent 28 years making decisions based on evidence." He looked around the room. "This isn't evidence." Diane folded her arms. "It proves she cheated on my son." He calmly shook his head. "No, ma'am. It proves someone printed a document." He placed the paper back onto the coffee table. The room went silent again. Ethan's uncle cleared his throat. His sister exchanged nervous glances with her husband. For the first time since I'd walked through the front door, I saw uncertainty on a few faces. I stepped forward before anyone else could speak. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "If this family wants proof," I said, "then let's get proof. A court-ordered test at an accredited laboratory with a witness and a documented chain of custody. Tonight, if we have to. Not a printed page from a lab none of us have ever heard of." Colonel Whitfield turned to look at me, and something in his expression shifted, not surprise exactly, but a kind of quiet approval. "Well said, Captain." Ethan suddenly raised his voice. "So what are you saying, sir? That she's innocent?" "I'm saying," the colonel replied evenly, "that accusing someone without verified evidence destroys families, and that your wife just proposed the only reasonable way forward in this entire room tonight." Diane scoffed. "My son deserves the truth." "I agree," he said, "which is exactly why this family needs an accredited laboratory, not assumptions, accusations, or public humiliation." His words landed heavily. I looked around the room. The people who had been staring at me with judgment only minutes earlier now avoided my eyes. Colonel Whitfield stepped beside me. "Captain Reyes, I believe you and your daughter should leave here tonight." He looked directly at Ethan. "And I strongly suggest no one makes another accusation until the truth is established properly." As I adjusted Lily against my shoulder and turned toward the door, I realized something had changed. For the first time that evening, I wasn't walking away in shame. I was walking away with someone who believed I deserved justice, and I was walking away having demanded it for myself. Colonel Whitfield walked me and Lily all the way to my car. The evening air felt strangely cold for late spring in North Carolina. My hands were shaking so badly that I struggled to buckle Lily into her car seat. He waited patiently until I closed the back door. "Captain Reyes," he said quietly. "Take a breath." I looked at him, and for the first time since walking into that house, the tears came. "I don't understand," I whispered. "How could they do this, tonight of all nights?" He didn't rush to answer. Instead, he handed me a clean handkerchief from his jacket pocket. "I served with your father for 11 years, he said. "I promised him, the week before he died, that I'd look after you if you ever needed it. I never expected it would be like this." He paused. "I've seen careers destroyed because people rush to conclusions. I've also seen innocent people survive because they refused to stop telling the truth." He looked at me steadily. "I believe you." 3 words. Not 4. Simple, plain, and they nearly broke me. Not because they solved anything, they didn't, but because they were the first words of trust I'd heard all night. Lily reached through the open car door and wrapped her tiny fingers around my sleeve. "Mama." I smiled through my tears. "I'm okay, sweetheart." Colonel Whitfield glanced toward the house. "I'll call Naomi Carter. She'll want you and Lily to stay with her tonight." "Thank you, sir." Before leaving, he looked me in the eyes. "One more thing." "Yes, sir." "Don't try to clear your name by arguing. People who have already decided you're guilty rarely change their minds because of louder arguments." He paused. "They change their minds when they're confronted with undeniable facts." "Get your evidence, Captain. Then let it speak." Those words stayed with me long after his taillights disappeared down the street. Naomi Carter had been my roommate through officer candidate school years earlier, and we'd remained close ever since. She welcomed Lily and me into her home without asking a single question. She simply hugged me. "Guest room's ready," she said. "We'll talk when you're ready." Later that night, after Lily finally fell asleep in a borrowed crib, I sat alone at Naomi's kitchen table. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Ethan, 19 missed calls, 6 voicemails, dozens of texts. The first ones were angry. "Where did you go? Running away makes you look guilty." Then they became demanding. "We need to finish this tonight." Finally, one message caught my attention. "Mom says you left too quickly to explain yourself." I stared at the screen. Left too quickly. Diane had pointed at the front door and screamed for me to leave. Now they were already rewriting what happened. Naomi poured me a cup of coffee. "What are you thinking? They're already changing the story." She nodded slowly. "Then don't give them another chance to." Naomi had known Ethan almost as long as I had back from the early years, when the 4 of us, Naomi, her husband Ethan, and me, used to grill out on Sunday afternoons before deployments scattered all of us to different corners of the world. She sat down across from me, wrapping her hands around her own mug. "Can I say something you might not want to hear?" "Go ahead." "I don't think this was about another woman." "Not really. I think Ethan's been drowning for a while, and instead of telling you, he decided it was easier to make you the villain." She shook her head. "That doesn't excuse a single thing he did tonight. I just don't think you're going to find some simple, clean reason for it. People who do something this cruel to someone they used to love usually have about 6 reasons, and every one of them is a lie they told themselves first." I stared into my coffee. I keep trying to understand it, like there's a version of tonight that makes sense if I just think about it long enough. "There isn't," Naomi said gently. "Some things don't make sense because the person doing them stopped making sense to themselves a long time ago. Your job isn't to understand him tonight, Alex. It's to protect Lily and get some sleep." I didn't sleep much that night anyway. I lay awake staring at the ceiling of Naomi's guest room, listening to Lily's steady breathing in the crib beside the bed, running the evening back and forth in my mind like a tape stuck on repeat. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, I stopped trying to make sense of Ethan's reasons and started making a list instead. Every question I needed answered, every piece of paper I needed to find. It was the only way I knew how to survive a night like that. Turn the fear into a checklist. My father used to say the army didn't make me disciplined, it just gave a name to something that had already been there. The next morning, I returned to the house while Ethan was supposedly at work. I only wanted Lily's clothes, some diapers, a few personal things. Diane wasn't there either. The house was quiet in a way that felt wrong. As I packed a small bag upstairs, I noticed Ethan's laptop sitting open on the desk. The screen had gone dark, but it hadn't locked. I almost laughed despite everything. Ethan had forgotten to lock his laptop for as long as I'd known him, especially after he'd had a few drinks the night before. It was a running joke between us once, back when we still had jokes between us. Then, a notification appeared. Brianna. Everything went exactly like we planned. She'll never recover from this. My heart stopped. With trembling hands, I opened the message thread. I had never heard the name Brianna before. The message sat there like a weight on my chest. Everything went like we planned. She'll never recover from this. Every instinct told me to slam the laptop shut and walk away. But another voice, the one the Army had spent years training into me, told me to stay calm, observe, and gather facts before making a move. I scrolled up. The first few texts seemed harmless. Then my stomach dropped. Brianna. Did everyone believe the report? Ethan. Every single one of them. Brianna. Did your mom throw her out? Ethan. Exactly like we planned. I stopped breathing for a second. This hadn't been an emotional outburst. It hadn't been a misunderstanding. It had been planned weeks in advance before I'd even stepped off that plane. I photographed every page of the conversation with trembling fingers. Some messages talked about humiliating me in front of the whole family. Others discussed timing it for the exact night I came home, so I'd be too exhausted and too shocked to fight back. One message stopped me cold. Brianna, once she's gone, selling the house will be easy. Selling the house. Ethan had never once mentioned selling our home. I scrolled further. Ethan, she'll probably just go quiet. She won't fight me. She never does. The words hurt more than I expected. After 8 years of marriage, he believed he knew exactly how I would react. He wasn't trying to prove Lily wasn't his. He never believed that for a second. He just needed me to believe it long enough to disappear. I noticed a folder on the desktop labeled Taxes. I almost ignored it. Almost. Inside were several PDFs and recent bank statements. One transfer stood out immediately. $18,500 moved out of our joint savings account 3 weeks earlier. Then another statement, $12,000 more. Then another. Nearly $40,000 had quietly disappeared while I was serving overseas. I whispered to myself, "What have you done, Ethan?" A car door slammed outside. I froze. Looking through the upstairs window, I saw Diane pulling into the driveway. She wasn't supposed to be home. I quickly emailed the photographs to my private account, logged out of the laptop exactly the way I'd found it, and grabbed Lily's diaper bag. Diane walked through the front door just as I reached the hallway. Her expression hardened immediately. "I thought I told you to stay away. I'm only here for Lily's things." She crossed her arms. "You've already destroyed enough." I looked at her calmly. "I didn't destroy this family." She laughed bitterly. "You expect me to believe that?" "No," I said, lifting the diaper bag over my shoulder. "I expect the truth to speak for itself." Without another word, I walked past her. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to defend myself. Outside, I buckled Lily into her car seat and drove straight to the office listed on the business card Colonel Whitfield had given me the night before. Attorney Grace Ellison welcomed me into her office that afternoon. She had spent over 20 years handling cases for military families, and it showed in the calm, methodical ways she listened. Her office walls were covered in framed photographs of soldiers she'd represented over the years, some in uniform, some in civilian clothes holding children, and I found myself staring at them while I waited for her to finish reading through the notes on her legal pad. "Captain Reyes," she said, folding her hands on the desk, "before we go any further, I want you to understand something. Cases like this move slowly, even when the truth is obvious. I need you to be patient, and I need you to let the process work instead of trying to win an argument every time your husband provokes you. Can you do that?" "I can do that." "Good. Because he's going to provoke you. People who build a lie usually need the other person to react emotionally, or the lie starts collapsing on its own." She tapped her pen against the legal pad. "Now, tell me everything from the beginning. Don't skip the small details. Sometimes the small details are the ones that matter most in front of a judge." I told her everything, start to finish, the text message about a surprise, the living room full of relatives, the DNA report, Colonel Whitfield walking through that door. When I finished describing everything, I handed her my phone. She scrolled through every photograph slowly, her eyebrows rising with each screen. Finally, she looked up. Captain Reyes. Yes, I don't think your husband simply tried to humiliate you. She opened a legal pad and started writing. I think he attempted to defraud you, and I think he did it with real planning, not panic. The room suddenly felt very quiet. I realized this was no longer just about a fake piece of paper. It was becoming something much bigger, and Ethan had no idea his own messages had just become the strongest evidence against him. There's something else, Grace said. The money that disappeared, it wasn't spent. It was moved into a separate account he opened 8 months ago, small transfers over time. People do that when they're hoping no one notices. How much are we talking about? Just under $42,000. She paused. And Captain Reyes, there's a consultation invoice in his email records from a divorce attorney, dated over a month before you came home. I sat in silence. That wasn't just our savings. That was Lily's future. The down payment on the bigger house we talked about. The emergency fund we'd built together. Dollar by dollar, deployment by deployment. I thought about all the months I'd spent overseas checking the account balance on a slow satellite connection during whatever 10 free minutes I had between shifts, feeling a small, steady comfort every time I saw that number holding, then growing. I had told myself more than once, out loud to nobody, that at least the money was safe, even when I wasn't. It was strange to sit in Grace's office and realize that comfort had been a lie the entire time. Quietly dismantled a few $1,000s at a time while I was half a world away trusting the wrong person to guard it. I want to be clear about something, Grace said, watching my face carefully. None of this is a reflection on your judgment, Captain Reyes. People like your husband don't announce what they are before they do something like this. If they did, nobody would ever marry them. She slid the statements back into the folder. The law has a name for what he did with this money, and it isn't a flattering one. We'll use that name in court, and it will matter more than you think. One more thing, Grace said gently. The laboratory listed on that report, it isn't accredited. It likely wouldn't hold up in any court in the state. I leaned back in my chair. Ethan hadn't simply believed a fake report. He had chosen to use one, knowing exactly what it was. That afternoon, another call came. Colonel Whitfield, Captain Reyes. Good afternoon, sir. I wanted to check on you and Lily. We're safe. I'm glad. He paused. I need you to remember something. Yes, sir. Your husband wanted you to react emotionally. Don't give him that victory. Strength doesn't need to shout to be heard, Captain. It only needs to stand its ground. After we hung up, I looked out Naomi's kitchen window. Lily was chasing a soap bubble Naomi had blown for her across the backyard, laughing every time it popped. For the first time in days, I didn't feel broken. I felt focused. Ethan thought he had already won. He had no idea that every lie he told was becoming another piece of evidence waiting for him in court. The court-approved DNA test was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Grace insisted that everything be handled through an accredited laboratory certified by the county court. No shortcuts, she reminded me. If the truth is on your side, let the process protect it. Ethan arrived 20 minutes late. He barely looked at me. Diane followed him into the waiting room, carrying herself with the same cold confidence she'd worn the night she pointed at that door. Lily sat quietly on my lap, clutching her stuffed rabbit, too young to understand why so many adults suddenly seemed angry around her. Grace leaned over and whispered, "No matter what happens today, stay calm." I nodded. "I will." The collection itself took less than 15 minutes. A technician gently swabbed the inside of Lily's cheek, then Ethan's, then mine. Everything was documented, every sample sealed, every signature witnessed, exactly the way it should have been handled from the beginning. As we walked toward the parking lot afterward, Ethan finally spoke. "You really think this is going to change anything?" I looked at him. "I think the truth already has." He laughed without humor. "You've always been good at pretending." I didn't answer. Grace had warned me. Every unnecessary argument only gave him another opportunity to twist my words. So I buckled Lily into her car seat and drove away. 3 days later, Grace called. "The results are in." My stomach tightened. "Can I come to your office?" "Please do." I arrived less than an hour later. Grace placed a sealed envelope on her desk. She didn't open it immediately. Instead, she looked me straight in the eyes. "Alex, are you ready?" I nodded. She carefully unfolded the report, then smiled. "The probability of paternity is 99.9999%. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Tears rolled down my cheeks. Not because I had doubted Lily. I never had. I cried because the truth had finally been put into words no one could argue with. Grace handed me a tissue. Congratulations. I laughed through my tears. That's a strange thing to say after everything that's happened. It isn't, she said, tapping the report. Today the truth officially replaced the lie. That afternoon, Ethan received the same results. His response surprised everyone. He didn't apologize. He didn't call to ask how Lily was doing. Instead, he sent one short text. The lab must have made a mistake. Grace read the message and shook her head. When someone refuses to accept evidence, they're no longer searching for the truth. She was right. The next morning, Ethan called 6 times. I didn't answer. Then Diane left a voicemail. Alex, we need to talk. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't concern for Lily. It was panic. By then, several relatives who had attended that so-called welcome home dinner had learned about the official results. Ethan's younger sister, Emily, was the first to reach out. Alex, she said quietly over the phone, I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything. I sat there and watched everyone accuse you. Her voice cracked. I should have stood up for you. I closed my eyes. I appreciate you calling. There's something else. What? The night you left. She hesitated. I saw Ethan throw another envelope into the fireplace. My heart skipped. What kind of envelope? I don't know, but after hearing about the real results, I think whatever was inside would have proven he was lying from the beginning. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear for a long moment, not sure what to say. Emily had been at that dinner too. She had sat on that couch, in that silent room, and watched everything happen without saying a word, the same as everyone else. Part of me wanted to ask her why it had taken results from an accredited laboratory for her to find her voice, why the truth alone hadn't been enough for anyone in that house that night. But I also remembered being 26 once, the youngest person in a room full of people twice my age, all of them certain about something I wasn't certain about at all. It's a specific kind of courage to be the first person to break with a room, and not everyone finds it in the moment they need it most. Some people only find it a few days later in a phone call, and I decided that was still worth something. Thank you for telling me, I said finally. It matters more than you probably think it does. I should have said something that night, Emily said quietly. I keep thinking about Lily's face. She didn't understand any of it, and none of us were thinking about her at all. After we hung up, I stared out the window. Ethan wasn't fighting to save our marriage. He was fighting to save the lie he had built. And with every passing day, that lie was falling apart around him. But not everyone in his family softened. His Aunt Carol Whitmore called Naomi's house that same week, not to apologize, but to defend him. You don't know what she put him through, Carol said sharply, before I'd even said hello. A man doesn't just make up something like that for no reason. There's always another side. There is another side, Carol, I said quietly. It's in a sealed envelope with an official seal on it. I'm happy to send you a copy. She hung up without another word. 2 days later, Emily told me that Carol had shown up at a family lunch and announced in front of everyone that she thought I had gotten to the laboratory somehow, that no accredited test was above being influenced by people with connections. Nobody at that lunch agreed with her out loud, Emily said, but nobody argued with her either. It was easier, apparently, to let Carol talk than to spend a holiday meal fighting about it. It stung more than I expected hearing that. Not because Carol's opinion carried any real weight in my life, but because it reminded me that evidence doesn't automatically dissolve every grudge. Some people build their beliefs first and go looking for facts to prop them up second, and when the facts don't cooperate, they simply decide the facts must be wrong. I thought about calling her, laying the entire file out on her kitchen table if I had to. Grace talked me out of it. You don't owe Carol Whitmore an explanation, she said. You already gave the truth to everyone who was willing to receive it. What she does with it now is her business, not yours. She never called again to apologize. Not that week, not months later. And strangely, I found I didn't need her to. Some people choose their side and stay there no matter what the evidence says. And I had learned by then that chasing everyone's approval was its own kind of exhausting battle I no longer needed to fight. By the end of that week, the story had spread through Ethan's family, not because I told anyone, but because the official results spoke for themselves. People who had watched me walk out of that living room carrying Lily suddenly realized they had witnessed something very different from what they believed. They hadn't seen a guilty woman exposed. They had watched an innocent wife and mother publicly humiliated. One by one, the phone calls began. Ethan's uncle called, then a cousin. Each conversation sounded almost the same. "We should have asked questions. We shouldn't have judged you. We're sorry." I appreciated every apology, but none of them erased that night. The image of Lily clinging to my uniform while strangers stared at us would stay with me for a long time. A few days later, Grace called again. "I've received another piece of discovery. Financial records." I drove straight to her office. She handed me several documents. "This account belongs to Ethan." I recognized the number immediately. "The secret account." She pointed to a series of transactions. "Look at the recipient." The name froze me. Brianna Shaw. Multiple payments. $5,000, $3,000, $7,000. Almost $20,000 altogether. He was giving our money to her. Grace nodded. "It appears so." She slid another document across the desk. This came from a subpoena of his phone records. I read the summary. Hundreds of calls, late-night conversations, weekend hotel reservations, restaurant charges from places he'd claimed were business dinners. I closed the folder. "I don't think I even knew my husband anymore." Grace sighed. "Unfortunately, there's one more thing." She handed me printed screenshots. Brianna had voluntarily turned over several text conversations after receiving a legal notice. These weren't the ones I'd photographed. These were newer. One read, "Don't worry. Once the divorce is final, everything will be ours." Another, "She'll never figure out the report wasn't real." I stared at the words. There it was, not suspicion, not confusion. A confession. Ethan had known the report was fake from the very beginning. Grace closed the folder quietly. "I believe this changes everything. This isn't just fraud on you, Alex. It's dissipation of marital assets, and it's evidence tampering in a custody matter. That's not just a civil issue anymore. I'll be recommending we refer part of this to the district attorney's office." Later that afternoon, my phone rang again. The caller ID surprised me. Brianna Shaw. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Instead, I answered. "Hello?" Her voice sounded nothing like I expected. Tired, almost frightened. "Alex, I know you probably hate me." I didn't answer. "I didn't know he was still living as your husband," she continued. "He told me you two were already separated. He said you only stayed married because of the benefits." I closed my eyes. Every sentence felt like another small blow. "When I learned the truth," she said, "I ended things. You helped him humiliate me. I know, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." Her voice cracked. "I've already given your attorney everything I have. Why? Because your daughter deserves better than the lies we helped create." After we hung up, I sat quietly in Naomi's backyard, watching Lily chase butterflies through the grass, laughing at nothing and everything at once. Children have a beautiful way of living only in the present. No resentment, no resentment, no revenge. Just joy. I thought about Brianna's voice on the phone, how tired it had sounded, how far it was from the confident, careless tone in those text messages I'd photographed off Ethan's laptop. It would have been easy to hate her completely, to lump her in with Ethan and Diane and Carol, and never think of her as anything but a villain in my own story. But sitting there in that yard, I found I mostly just felt sorry for her, and a little sorry for myself for how long it took me to understand that people who help build a lie are very often also standing inside one, believing it just as hard as the person who first told it to them. Looking at my daughter, I realized something important. This fight had never really been about proving I was innocent. It was about making sure Lily grew up knowing that truth matters, even when lies seem louder for a while. The week before the hearing, Colonel Whitfield asked me to stop by his office at the end of the duty day. I found him behind his desk, reading glasses low on his nose, a folder open in front of him that I recognized as the character reference he'd been drafting for the court. "Sit down, Major." He caught himself and smiled faintly. "Captain, forgive me. I have a feeling I'll be saying that title by mistake again before too long." I sat. "You didn't have to write anything for the court, sir." "I know I didn't have to." He closed the folder and looked at me over his glasses. "Your father asked one thing of me. I think writing 4 paragraphs for a judge is a fairly small price to pay for 11 years of friendship." He paused. "How are you holding up, really? Not the answer you give at formation, the real one." I thought about lying, the way I'd gotten good at doing for months by then. Instead, I said, "Some days I'm furious. Some days I just feel tired of being furious. Today's somewhere in between." He nodded slowly, as if that answer satisfied him more than any other one would have. That sounds about right for where you are in this. I'll tell you something I wish someone had told me the first time I sat across from a judge in a case like this years ago, long before you were ever in my command. The system is slow and it can feel unfair in its slowness. But slow and careful is exactly what protects people like you in the end. Because it's the same slowness that makes it hard for people like your husband to talk their way out of what the evidence already shows. Don't mistake patience for weakness, Captain. It rarely is. The divorce hearing was scheduled for the second week of September. By then, nearly 4 months had passed since the night Ethan and his family had tried to throw me out of my own home. I walked into the Cumberland County Courthouse wearing a navy blue suit instead of my uniform. Grace had given me one piece of advice that morning. You're not here as a soldier today. What am I here as? A mother. Those words stayed with me as I carried Lily into the courthouse. Naomi watched her in the waiting area while Grace and I entered the courtroom. Ethan was already there. He looked different, thinner, the confidence he'd worn during that so-called welcome home dinner completely gone. Diane sat behind him, avoiding my eyes for the first time since I'd known her. When the judge entered, everyone stood. After opening statements, Grace calmly presented our evidence, the official DNA report, the bank records showing the hidden account, the transfers to Brianna, the text messages discussing the fake report weeks before I ever came home, the confession in Ethan's own words that he knew it wasn't real. Not once did Grace raise her voice. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. Ethan's attorney attempted to argue that his client had acted out of genuine, if misguided, concern. The judge looked over the documents for several long moments, then asked Ethan one question. Did you know this report had not been verified by an accredited laboratory? Ethan hesitated. I wasn't sure. Grace immediately handed the judge one of Ethan's own text messages. She'll never figure out the report wasn't real. The courtroom went completely silent. The judge adjusted his glasses. Mr. Cole. His voice was calm but firm. This message suggests you knew exactly what you were doing. Ethan lowered his head. His attorney didn't ask another question. The judge continued reviewing the record. The financial statements, the divorce consultation invoice dated weeks before my return, the confirmed timeline showing the entire confrontation had been planned in advance. This court, he said finally, does not take lightly the fabrication of evidence in a matter involving a minor child. The financial transfers made to a third party from marital assets without disclosure or consent constitute dissipation of marital assets under this state's family code and will be treated accordingly in the division of property. He paused, looking directly at Ethan. I am also referring the matter of the falsified paternity document to the district attorney's office for review of possible evidence tampering. Whether charges are pursued will not be decided in this courtroom, but this behavior will not be quietly absorbed into a divorce settlement and forgotten. I felt Grace's hand rest briefly on my arm, steady and reassuring. Next came the issue of custody. The judge reviewed Lily's medical records, statements from Naomi, and a written character reference submitted by Colonel Whitfield, who could not attend in person due to duty obligations. The judge read part of it aloud. Captain Alex Reyes has consistently demonstrated the judgment, composure, and integrity befitting an officer of the United States Army, both in uniform and, more importantly, as a mother. Before the ruling, the judge asked if either party wished to make a final statement. Ethan's attorney declined on his behalf. Grace looked at me and I nodded. I stood, smoothed my jacket the way I would before a formation inspection, and spoke directly to the judge rather than to Ethan. Your Honor, I didn't come here today because I wanted revenge. I came here because my daughter is going to grow up hearing this story someday, one way or another, and I needed it to be a true one. I've spent 9 years learning that the Army doesn't care how loudly you argue your case. It cares whether your facts hold up under pressure. I would like my daughter's life to hold up the same way. I sat back down. The courtroom was quiet enough that I could hear the clock on the wall ticking. The judge made a note, then looked over his glasses at Ethan for a long moment before continuing. This court has reviewed a great deal of family litigation over the years, Mr. Cole, much of it involving accusations that turn out to be exaggerated on both sides. This is not one of those cases. The evidence here is not ambiguous. He turned a page. A fabricated paternity report, an unaccredited laboratory, premeditated financial concealment, and a documented plan carried out on the very evening this officer returned from 9 months of overseas deployment. This court takes a dim view of using a minor child as an instrument in a scheme of this nature. By the end of the hearing, the court's decision was clear. Primary physical custody of Lily would remain with me. Ethan would receive supervised visitation only, subject to review no sooner than 2 years out, and only after completing court-mandated parenting and anger management counseling. The hidden funds would be returned to the marital estate, and Ethan would reimburse my legal expenses related to the fraudulent claim on the documented grounds of dissipation of assets and bad faith litigation conduct. When the hearing ended, Ethan slowly approached me outside the courtroom. For a moment, I thought he might finally apologize. Instead, he quietly asked, "Do you really think you won?" I looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully in her stroller, then back at him. "This was never about winning," I said. "It was about protecting our daughter from the consequences of your choices." Without another word, I turned and walked away. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like someone seeking revenge. I felt like a mother who had finally found justice. Almost 6 months passed before I saw Diane again. Life had finally begun to settle into something that resembled peace. Lily was growing fast, putting little sentences together, insisting on helping me make breakfast every morning, even if helping usually meant dropping blueberries on the kitchen floor. I had returned to full duty at Fort Bragg, balancing motherhood and my career one careful day at a time. For the first time in years, coming home felt safe. Then one quiet Saturday afternoon, someone knocked on Naomi's front door. Naomi glanced through the window. "Alex," she said, her voice surprised. "I think you'd better see this." I walked over. Standing on the front porch was Diane. She looked older, not just older, smaller somehow. The confident woman who had ordered me out of her house had disappeared. In her place stood a widow in her early 70s, holding a small white gift bag. Naomi looked at me. "You want me to send her away?" I thought about it. A few months earlier, I probably would have. Instead, I quietly nodded. "I'll talk to her." I stepped outside and gently closed the door behind me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Diane broke the silence. "I don't expect you to forgive me." I folded my arms. "Then why are you here?" She looked down at the gift bag in her hands. I replayed that night in my head every single day. Her voice trembled. "I keep hearing myself yelling at you." I didn't answer. I watched you standing there with Lily, and I never once asked if my own son was telling the truth. She wiped away a tear. The words hung between us. They were the first honest thing I had ever heard Diane say about that night. "I believed him," she whispered. "I know. I wanted to protect my family." I looked at her calmly. "You already had one, Diane. Me and Lily were part of it too." She closed her eyes. For a moment, she couldn't speak. When she finally looked up, her face was wet with tears. "I failed you." I didn't know what to say because she was right. She had. "My husband died when Ethan was 17, Diane said quietly. "I raised him alone after that. He was all I had left of that life. I think some part of me was always afraid of losing him, too. I let that fear make my decisions that night, and it cost me the one thing I claimed I was trying to protect. I hadn't known that. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it explained a piece of it I hadn't understood before." Diane slowly handed me the gift bag. "These belonged to Ethan's grandmother." Inside was a small hand-knitted baby blanket, cream-colored, carefully preserved. "My mother made it when Ethan was born. I think Lily should have it." I carefully folded the blanket back into the bag. "Thank you." Diane nodded, then took a deep breath. "There's another reason I came. I waited. I'd like the chance to know my granddaughter." For the first time, she didn't call Lily that child. She called her granddaughter. It was a small difference, but it mattered. "I can't pretend none of this happened," I said gently. "I know. You accused me in front of your entire family. I know. You tried to throw us out of our own home. I know." She never argued. She never made excuses. She simply accepted every word. "I can't promise things will ever be the way they were," I said. "And I need you to understand something clearly. I'm giving you one chance, Diane, not because I've forgotten what happened, but because Lily deserves the chance to know her grandmother, if that grandmother has actually changed. But if you ever choose silence over the truth again, if you ever stand by while someone tries to hurt this family with lies, that door closes for good. There won't be a second time after that." Diane looked down at the gift bag still sitting between us on the porch railing, as if she needed something to hold on to while she said the rest of what she'd come to say. I used to tell myself I threw you out of that house to protect Ethan, she said slowly. But sitting alone these past months, I think I threw you out to protect myself. If I believed you, then I had to believe my son was capable of doing something that cruel to his own wife and daughter in my house in front of my family. It was easier to believe you were the one who'd done something wrong. It let me keep the version of him I'd built in my head since he was 17 years old, and it was just the two of us against everything. I didn't say anything right away. There was nothing comfortable to say to that, and I had learned by then not to fill every silence just to make someone else feel better. I'm not asking you to say it's all right. Diane added quietly, It isn't all right. I just needed you to know I finally see it for what it was. Diane's eyes filled with tears again. That's more than fair. We'll start with short visits, I said. Supervised at first. One step at a time. She covered her mouth. You mean that? I mean, we'll take it slow. That's not weakness, Diane. That's just how trust gets rebuilt, if it gets rebuilt at all. She quietly nodded. That's more kindness than I deserve. As she walked back to her car, I stood on the porch watching her leave. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't forgetting. It wasn't pretending the pain never happened. It was choosing not to let that pain become Lily's inheritance, while still protecting the boundary that kept my daughter safe. And somehow that choice felt stronger than any revenge I could have imagined. 1 year later, my life looked nothing like it had the night I walked into that so-called welcome home dinner. In many ways, it looked better than I had ever imagined. Lily was almost 2.5 years old now. Every morning she raced through the house with the same stuffed rabbit she'd clutched during those difficult weeks. She filled every room with laughter, reminding me that children have an incredible gift. They don't measure life by its worst moments. They measure it by love. I had accepted a promotion to major and continued serving at Fort Bragg. The promotion wasn't just another rank on my uniform. It represented every early morning, every deployment, every sacrifice, and every moment I had refused to let someone else's lies define who I was. Colonel Whitfield pinned my new rank during a small ceremony attended by fellow officers Naomi and Lily. Afterward, he shook my hand. I'm proud of the officer you've become, he said. Then he smiled down at Lily, and even prouder of the mother. He paused and added, almost to himself, real strength never needed to shout to be heard. You proved that the first night I met you in that living room, and you've proved it every day since. Those words meant more to me than any medal I'd ever received. Naomi laughed beside us. I told you a year ago you'd get through this. You did. I just wish I'd believed you sooner. You believe it now. That's what matters. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. Ethan completed the counseling required by the court. Over time, his supervised visits gradually became more structured and calmer, and he began slowly rebuilding a relationship with Lily, one small step at a time, always within the boundaries the court had set. Our conversations remained brief and focused entirely on our daughter. The anger that once lived between us slowly faded, not because the past disappeared, but because Lily deserved parents who could put her needs before their pride, even when pride was the only thing either of us had left to hold on to some days. The district attorney's office ultimately declined to pursue criminal charges against Ethan, citing insufficient grounds for prosecution beyond what the family court had already addressed, though the finding of fabricated evidence remained part of his permanent record in the custody proceedings, a fact that would follow him into every future review of his visitation rights. Diane kept her promise. She never pushed for more than what I'd offered. She earned trust one visit at a time. Sometimes she came over just to read Lily a story or bring homemade cookies. One afternoon, I found the two of them sitting on the living room floor, wrapping Lily's favorite doll in the little knitted blanket Diane had given us months earlier. Lily looked up and smiled. Grandma made baby cozy. Diane looked at me with tears in her eyes. I simply smiled back. That was enough. Carol never called again. I heard, secondhand, through Emily, that she still believed there had to be another side to the story, evidence or no evidence. It used to bother me. By the end of that year, it didn't anymore. Not every relationship can be restored. Some wounds leave permanent scars. But scars don't always represent weakness. Sometimes they simply remind us how much we've survived and remind us that not everyone's forgiveness is ours to earn or to chase. Looking back, I realized something important. The greatest victory wasn't proving the DNA report was fake. It wasn't winning in court. It wasn't recovering the money Ethan had hidden. It wasn't even hearing the apologies. The greatest victory was refusing to become bitter, because bitterness would have stolen something the lies never could, my peace. A few weeks after the promotion ceremony, Lily and I sat on the back porch watching the sun go down. Her small hand wrapped around one of my fingers the way it always was when she was tired and fighting sleep. She looked up at the eagle rank pinned to the collar of the uniform jacket I still hadn't taken off. "Mama, what's that?" "That's called an oak leaf, sweetheart. It means Mama's a major now." She frowned, the way toddlers do when a word sounds too big to hold on to. "Major Mama." I laughed, pulling her closer. "Yeah, Major Mama. I like that." She fell asleep against my shoulder a few minutes later, and I sat there a long while not wanting to move her, thinking about the woman I had been on that porch 3 years earlier, and the woman I had become since. I thought about my father and what he might have said if he could have seen that living room the night I came home, and what he might have said about the woman his old friend had walked out of it with. I like to think he would have simply said what Colonel Whitfield always said, in that same steady voice, without ever needing to raise it. "I believe you." Today, when people ask me how I survived the hardest season of my life, I give them the same answer. The truth didn't save me overnight. It saved me one honest decision at a time. The decision to stay calm instead of shouting, to gather evidence instead of accusations, to protect my daughter's future instead of chasing revenge, and to set a boundary instead of pretending forgiveness meant forgetting. If my story has taught you anything, I hope it's this. Never rush to judge someone based on accusations alone. Truth deserves patience, and people deserve the chance to be heard, provided they're actually willing to listen when the truth finally arrives. The strongest form of justice isn't cruelty. It's living with integrity when others expect you to break, and it's knowing exactly where your kindness ends and your daughter's safety begins. Protect the people you love. Cherish your family, the ones who earn that trust, and keep it. And never let anger become the legacy you leave behind for the next generation to carry. Some nights after Lily's asleep and the house is quiet, I still think about that living room, the folding chairs, the silence. Ethan's hand holding out that folded piece of paper like it was a verdict instead of a lie. I used to think about it with my jaw clenched, replaying every word I wished I'd said in the moment instead of later, in the car, in the shower, in the middle of the night. I don't think about it that way anymore. Now I mostly think about the sound the front door made when it opened, and how something as simple as one person choosing to ask a real question, "Was Captain Reyes present when this sample was collected?" was enough to start turning an entire room of certainty back into doubt, and eventually, doubt back into truth. It taught me that courage in a crisis doesn't always look like raised voices or slammed doors. Sometimes it looks like a single calm question asked by someone willing to wait for a real answer. I don't know what season of life you're in right now, listening to this. Maybe you're in your own version of that living room, surrounded by people who've already decided who you are before you've had the chance to prove them wrong. If that's you, I hope you'll remember that the loudest room isn't always the one that gets the final word. Sometimes the truth just needs a little more time, a little more patience, and one person willing to stand beside you while you wait for it to arrive. And if this story reminded you of your own strength, or of someone in your life who needed a second chance built on honesty instead of silence, I hope you'll carry a piece of it with you. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourselves and of the people you love.